Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another Magic Arena gameplay video. Today we're taking a look at Wayward Frenzy, a red-green deck that's built around Experimental Frenzy alongside Wayward Swordtooth. Since one of the drawbacks of Experimental Frenzy is that if you hit your second land on top of your deck, you're kind of stuck for the turn and you don't get to do anything else. But in this deck we've got multiple solutions for that second land, and one of those is Wayward Swordtooth, which lets us play an additional land on each of our turns. So if we hit a second land, we can simply play it thanks to our Swordtooth, and the more copies of Wayward Swordtooth we have in play, the more additional lands we get to play each turn, so we can completely keep going off when we have an Experimental Frenzy in play. Some of the other cards that synergize nicely with Experimental Frenzy are Treasure Map, which lets us scry 1 if we tap it and pay 1 mana, so we can potentially scry lands to the bottom, so we can keep playing additional spells on top of our deck with the Experimental Frenzy. And the other synergy with Experimental Frenzy are all the Explore creatures. Take for example Merfolk Branchwalker, 2 mana 2/1, when it enters the battlefield we get to explore, which means we get to reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land card we can put it into our hand, if it's a non-land card we can decide whether to put it in the graveyard or not, and then the Branchwalker also gets a +1/+1 counter, which means that if there's a frenzy in play and we play Branchwalker from the top of our deck and there happens to be a land on top, we can simply put it into our hand instead of having it stuck on top of our library, so we can keep going off and play more creatures. So that's kind of the idea behind the deck. We're trying to fully maximize on the power level of Experimental Frenzy by letting us go off past multiple lands. So let's take a look at our entire deck list, starting out with our 1-drops, where of course we have the full 4 copies of Llanowar Elves. The deck can be pretty mana hungry, so getting to start with a turn 1 Llanowar Elves leads to some very explosive starts. Then we also have 2 copies of Exilius Diviner, which is definitely a very weak creature. 2 mana for an 0/3, when it enters the battlefield lets us explore, but we just want a critical mass of explore creatures, since we are playing Wildgrowth Walker, which we'll get to in a second, which is an important piece of the puzzle. And even though Exilius Diviner is quite weak by itself, it does still help us find our missing combo pieces like Treasure Map, Wayward Swordtooth and Experimental Frenzy by letting us explore. And it's also important that in a deck with Experimental Frenzy, we keep the curve of the deck relatively low, so we don't have too many expensive cards on top of our deck when we're trying to go off with Experimental Frenzy. Then next up we have our 4 copies of Merfolk Branchwalker, which is the better version of Exilius Diviner, as a 2 mana 2/1 with Explore, as it can beat down a bit harder and pressure opposing control decks. And then we've got the full 4 copies of Wildgrowth Walker, which is also a very important piece of the puzzle. 2 mana for a 1/3 that says whenever a creature we control explores, put a +1/+1 counter on Wildgrowth Walker and we gain 3 life. So padding our life total is very important against any aggressive deck, since all we care about when we have Experimental Frenzy in play is to stay alive, since sooner or later we're going to completely overwhelm our opponent in card advantage. So Wildgrowth Walker plus all the Explorer synergies helps us stay alive, so we can pad our life total and ensure that we can keep going off. Then we've got the full 4 copies of Treasure Map, which is a great card by itself and even better in this deck, since the Scry 1 is very important to help us find our missing combo pieces, and then once it transforms can provide a bit of card advantage. The extra treasures provide extra mana, so we can play multiple spells with Experimental Frenzy in play, and the 3 treasures also help us gain the City's Blessing for our Wayward Swordtooth, so we can ascend a lot faster. So Treasure Map, just an excellent card in this deck. Then we've got 3 copies of Fight with Fire, which deals 5 damage to a creature at sorcery speed, and then later in the game we can also kick it for 5 and a red to deal 10 damage divided as we choose among any number of targets instead, which of course is a very powerful effect, either kind of functioning as a sweeper effect or just dealing 10 damage to the opponent's face to help us finish them off. And in this deck, when we're going off with Experimental Frenzy, we can very quickly accumulate a lot of mana through hitting land drops with Wayward Swordtooths, and also by finding more Llanowar Elves. So later in the game we'll have access to a ton of mana, so at some point, even if we accumulated a number of Fight with Fires in our hand, we can just sacrifice the Experimental Frenzy and then start pointing Fight with Fires with Kicker at the opponent's face to close out the game. Then we've got 4 copies of Jadelight Ranger, which is a 3 mana 2/1 that explores twice when it enters the battlefield. It's another great card in this deck. And then we've got our 4 copies of Wayward Swordtooth, 3 mana for a 5/5 that can't attack or block unless we have the City's Blessing. And of course the Swordtooth has Ascent, which means that if we control 10 or more permanents while we have the Swordtooth in play, we gain a City's Blessing for the rest of the game, which means that all future copies of Wayward Swordtooth will also be able to attack. And then of course we get to play an additional land on each of our turns. So Wayward Swordtooth is also the reason why we want to limit the number of non-permanent cards in our deck, so we get to reach the City's Blessing a lot faster, so the Swordtooth can start attacking and blocking, and the Swordtooth also synergizing very nicely with a transformed treasure map, making 3 treasure tokens, which is a lot of permanence for the City's Blessing. And then we've got our 4 copies of Frenzy, which is the most important card in our deck, letting us look at and play the top card of our library, and the drawback being that we can't play cards from our hand, but the deck is designed to play around that. And then at some point for 3 in a red, we can destroy the Frenzy, so we can start playing cards out of our hand, so we can cast a lethal Fight with Fire or Banefire, for example, once we've accumulated a lot of mana. And once you have a Frenzy in play, you can of course scry additional copies of Experimental Frenzy to the bottom, or explore them into the graveyard, so you don't have to sacrifice them both, so you can at some point deploy your hand. And once you do sacrifice Frenzy, it's pretty likely that you've accumulated a bunch of extra lands into your hand because of all the Explorer creatures, but if you have some number of Wayward Swordtooth in play, you can simply deploy all those extra lands, so you can cast a Kicked Fight with Fire or a Lethal Banefire, which we'll get to in a second. And then our next card is 2 copies of Path of Discovery, 4 mana for an enchantment that says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, it explores, which works very nicely with cards like Wildgrowth Walker, letting us gain additional life and put additional +1/+1 counters on it. And of course also works nicely with Frenzy in that we get to put additional lands into our hand instead of having them stuck on top of our deck. And then last but not least, 2 copies of Banefire, X and red to deal X damage to any target, and if X is 5 or more, the Banefire cannot be countered and the damage cannot be prevented, so great finisher against counterspell decks, but also just a great finisher in general. And then our mana base is 7 mountains, 12 forests, and 4 copies of Rootbound Crag. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. And this hand's okay. Alright, so we're up against a blue control deck of some variety. Jade Light Ranger's not bad here. Could also treasure map. I think we'll Jade Light. Can apply a bit of pressure here. Don't need a second treasure map. Path of Discovery is tempting. Yeah, sure. Alright. So let's start by attacking with the Jade Lights. And I think we're gonna double 2-drop instead of playing Path of Discovery here, to play around the counterspell a bit better. Of course, a bit of a nombo since we're not taking full use of the Path of Discovery now. I guess we can keep that since we just need to resolve 1 Frenzy to win the game. Hopefully we don't face an Ixalan's Binding. So next turn we might tap out for Experimental Frenzy, kind of hoping it gets countered since we have a second one. But then we of course miss out on the Path of Discovery value. Alright, they did have the option of Field of Ruin to shuffle, but they wanted to keep up 4 mana here. Let's tap out for Frenzy, get it countered. I think that's fine. Haven't played a land for the turn yet, so if it does resolve and there's a land on top, we would be happy. Perfect. Get in for 5. So now we're in Experimental Frenzy mode. Could be a mill deck too, yeah. They are going to Field of Ruin to get second white source probably. We'll get our second red. And the Branch Walker on top. We're definitely still gonna use a treasure map here, I think, just to try and transform it sooner so we get more mana. Could see Cleansing Nova here on artifacts or enchantments too, but then they lose the Search for Ascanta, so it's probably on creatures. Yep, that's fine. So I don't mind using the treasure map here, and then might use it again on upkeep. So yeah, we'll just draw that, since I don't want to use a mana from treasure map. At least not quite yet. Alright, Branch Walker's good. And here's where the Explorer creatures work out nicely with Frenzy, since normally that land would stay on top, but now thanks to the Explorer we put it in our hand instead, so we can maybe keep going. Sadly, double green card here, so got punished for maybe getting the mountain earlier instead of the forest, but that's okay. We'll just scry to the bottom and try and find a cheap card we can play instead. Alright, another Jade Lights, too bad. So next turn we'll draw the Jade Light Ranger, and what we really want to find is a Wayward Swordtooth, since that would let us play multiple lands a turn. So if we find a land pocket, we can just play right through it. Cleansing Nova on artifacts and enchantments, that's perfect. So now we draw the Jade Light, and we still have another backup Frenzy. So what's our plan? We could Path of Discovery into Diviner. We could Diviner into Frenzy to make sure the Frenzy resolves. It's probably better, since if Frenzy resolves I don't see us losing a long game. So we'll play the land out of hand. Play Diviner, play Frenzy. I guess we'll keep that on top so we can just draw it next turn. Play Frenzy. Attack for 2. Definitely some interesting decisions we have to make when it comes to these Explorer triggers. Ooh, Reliquary Tower, so not your usual control deck, it looks like. What is this? 7 mana. 6 mana for an Azure. Alright. Azure's pretty scary here. Banefire, which we can't cast because of Azure, sadly. Alright, so that's kind of a bust. So we might want to sacrifice Frenzy so we can kill Azure, since otherwise we might die to it. No attacks with Azure. Yeah, let's sack this. We can Banefire Azure the first time, and then Banefire Face the second time. That should be good enough. And I think we're fine to attack with both into a potential Cellar Wreckage. Since we can still use the extra lands. So this is also why still drawing the Jade Light Rangers was fine, despite having a Frenzy in play at the time, since now we can still cast them for value. Alright, Jumpstart Chemist's Insights, discarding Essence Scatter. So 3 fresh cards at 8 life. We've got a Banefire for 6 in hand, but we're under no pressure to play it. So we can kind of wait it out. And I think we'll go Path plus Jade Light here for value. And don't need another one. Would rather draw more lands here with the Explorer. Alright, perfect. So next turn we'll have a lethal Banefire. Oh, I guess we did have lethal with the Banefire there. My bad. They're at 7. Oh well. This should work. Do it for 5. I guess we might as well play around Revitalize. Do it for 8. Alright, GG's. It's a pretty interesting game where we used Experimental Frenzy for a while and then switched gears and just went double Banefire. Hand looks good. Just missing some lands and an experimental frenzy. Got all the other pieces. Alright, just gonna play Jade Light here. Want to find more lands first. Perfect. And the Explorer creatures plus Wayward Swordtooth also synergize nicely, letting us first draw extra lands and then play those extra lands with the Swordtooth. Turn to it onto Vanguard, so an aggressive creature deck. Alright, so time to play Swordtooth. Play 2 lands. And do we Treasure Map or do we Branchwalker? Could also Diviner, which blocks the Vanguard if we hit a non-land card. So I'm kind of into that as well. I did find a land, that's okay. Pretty close to having the City's Blessing here. Uh-oh. Got a Clarion incoming. Still get to keep our Swordtooth, so that's okay. I did consider last turn to maybe attack with the Jade Light Ranger just to force him to either take 2 or pay 4. So can play 2 lands, Treasure Map first, I guess. And then just play 2 Branchwalkers. Seems okay. Fight with Fire. Seems okay. They're likely to have some angels in there that we want to kill. If they play a Phoenix, this is a little awkward. But we're not too far away from kicking it. So, yeah, sure. Keep it on top. And attack for 5. Alright. So we've got a nice beatdown draw. And we're just one frenzy away from going crazy. So don't want to see a Phoenix here. Shalai's fine. So just gonna fight with Fire it. And the Vanguard can block Swordtooth at the cost of 4 life instead of taking 5, but that's okay. We'll just kill it. And attack with everyone. Opponent takes 10 essentially. Unless they actually chum block. So they actually chum blocked with the Vanguard, that's fine. Alright, Lara Dawnbringer could be an issue. So, want to find an answer here. Another Swordtooth is not going to cut it. Alright. Apparently it ignored the stop on upkeep, but we drew a Banefire, so that works. Actually works out better, since if we did put a stop on Scryed, we wouldn't have been able to cast a Banefire for 5. So, thanks, I guess. Alright, well, that worked out. And this hand seems good. Got all the pieces. Right, it's up against a graveyard deck. So do we prioritize Branchwalker or Treasure Map? Probably Branchwalker. Just want to find a Wayward Swordtooth more than anything, since that would completely unlock our hand. We'll take it for now. Might see a second Stitcher Supplier here. Or a Midnight Reaper. I think we're happy to trade for the Reaper, but we also kind of want to stay back. So do we Jade Light or do we Treasure Map? Jade Light is kind of letting us scry twice right away to find a Swordtooth. So I guess we're fine to attack here. And then we've got Jade Light back on defense to block the Reaper. Don't think that's good enough. Just want a Swordtooth. And a land. Alright. So don't have the most explosive draw without Elves, without Swordtooth. But we do have a Frenzy. Question is, when are we going to play the Frenzy? Do we play it on turn 4? Do we play Treasure Map first? Alright, that's a nice Playcrafter here. Sacking Supplier, drawing the card with Reaper. But once we get a Frenzy online, we'll be drawing a lot more than just one card. We also haven't drawn any of our Wild Growth Walkers yet. That's also a big part of the deck. So I think we'll Treasure Map plus Branch Walker here. Think we have to put that in the graveyard. And then we'll put a stop on upkeep. So 6 creatures in graveyard, that's scary. Fine Broker getting back maybe a Molder Hulk. Yep. Alright, let's scry. Try and find that Swordtooth. There we go. So if Swordtooth survives and we get to play Frenzy, then we're golden. Let's see if they have a Chupacabra here. Yep. Alright, well. Hopefully we'll find another one soon. Sure. They get to draw a card, but we just want to preserve our life total for as long as possible here. Since we're favorite if the game goes long. So do we scry an upkeep? Probably not, since we want to play the Frenzy this turn anyway. Another Treasure Map. Alright, I guess we'll Treasure Map plus Frenzy. Oof, that's unfortunate. Had we played Frenzy first, we would have been able to still play the Swordtooth. Since now we're going to draw the Swordtooth instead of being able to play it off the top. But I guess we'll be okay, since Treasure Map does a decent impersonation of the Swordtooth, helping us scry lands to the bottom. So now we just want to find some Wild Growth Walkers, some Explorer triggers, pad our life total, and eventually find a big Banefire. It's a big Molder Hulk. Alright. We'll take 5 for now. Although we could block if we're afraid that they have a Chupacabra anyway. How much damage we taking? 2 down to 16. Next turn, 9. Plus another 5, 14. Yeah, sure. Alright, just need a nice turn here with our Frenzy. Scrying with Treasure Map only helps in the sense that it helps us transform it faster, which is probably a good reason. And we'll keep the Swordtooth on top. I'm not sure why, but you never know. One nice thing about Swordtooth, even if it's stuck in your hand, is that sometimes on the final turn, when you have a Banefire or a Fight with Fire stuck in your hand, and you want to play it so you sack the Frenzy, if you then also have a Swordtooth in hand, or in play, you can play all the extra lands that you were kind of sandbagging from all the Explore triggers, and then you can use those extra lands to play a bigger Banefire or help you cast a Fight with Fire. So that's actually pretty neat about this deck too. Alright, let's start going off. Alright, Fight with Fire. Can't play it kicked, but we can take out the Midnight Reaper, so that's probably good enough. Although, let's see, if we flip this, we'll have 7 mana, so yeah, we're 2 mana short here. Alright, can't play that one, so we'll scry to the bottom. Although I guess we could play it if we flip Treasure Map and sack all the treasures. So is that worth it? Maybe, since it would make a top deck Wild Growth Walker a lot better in the future. Yeah, I could see that. So we'll keep it on top. Play a path and hope there's no Wild Growth Walker on top of our deck and just a land instead. Since I don't think we've played land for a turn yet. Alright, just a Treasure Map, that's fine. Alright, so we'll take some abuse this turn, but then next turn we can keep going off, now with the Path of Discovery in play. So if we find Wild Growth Walkers, we'll be able to gain a ton of life. So definitely an interesting game here. Necrotic Wound for 10. So we're taking 11 here. But I've definitely had games like these where you go super low and then just untap and go off with Frenzy, find Wild Growth Walker, and pass a turn back at 20 life. So hope's not lost yet, but definitely cutting it close here. We saw a third of our deck already, so there's still 4 Wild Growth Walkers hiding there. Find getting back Find Broker and Giant, which is also gonna be pretty painful here. With how many creatures? 8 in the graveyard. Alright, so don't like our chances now, but alright, there's a Wild Growth Walker we were talking about. So eagerly. So step 1. Alright, that's good. Another Wild Growth Walker, perfect. Keep that on top. Draw the land. Land Elves is fine. And this is how Path of Discovery is so nice in this deck. Play lands, I guess we'll scry, in case there's another Land Elves on top. Alright, Fight with Fire instead. Alright, so we're back at 26. Got some beefy Wild Growth Walkers in play. And next turn we can keep going off. Maybe scrying with the Treasure Map was ambitious since Land Elves was the only payoff, and now we will be unable to cast a Fight with Fire next turn, but so it goes. Necrotic Wounds, not quite enough to exile the Wild Growth Walker here, since the creature has left the graveyard since last turn, so maybe a small oversight. Find Broker gets back Molderhulk, and 2 mana Molderhulk doesn't return anything. I guess we could also just take 2, otherwise they get to return it next turn, and 2 damage doesn't really matter at this point. Alright, so draw the Fight with Fire. Let's keep going off. Oh yes, all the Explorer triggers. This feels nice. Alright. How high can we go? Another Path of Discovery. I'll take it. And another Frenzy. I guess we'll scry that to the bottom. Don't really want to draw it. And perfect, hit the Land Elves too. That's why we scry that to the bottom. Swordtooth. Might as well put that in the graveyard. Another Fight with Fire will keep on top. So that's how we're going to close out the game in a turn or two here. GG's. Almost dead on board, got to untap with Frenzy and completely went off, so that's also why I like the inclusion of Wild Growth Walkers in this deck. And how about this hand? A bit land light, no Land Elves early or Branch Walkers to help us smooth out our first couple turns, but otherwise we have everything we need. Treasure Map, Frenzy, Swordtooth. So if we just draw 2 lands off the top, we'll be in a great spot. Alright, Branch Walker's good too. Alright. Let's Branch Walker it up, hope to draw land. Even though we might be up against a control deck where having multiple Frenzies is good, do really want to find a land here. Alright, interesting. Grixis Pirates, perhaps? Or maybe a small legendary sub-theme? Alright, it's painful. So this draw didn't really come together. And now we're pretty far behind. Swordtooth also not at its best when our hand is all spells. Alright, so might just have to fight with Fire Captain Lattery here so we don't take too much damage. Alternative is Jade Light Ranger, which also blocks Lattery if it resolves. I guess we'll Jade Light here. Alright, resolves. Just want 2 lands here. Perfect. Alright, now we're back in it. Next turn we could go Swordtooth, play 2 lands. Play Treasure Map afterwards. Yeah, Niv Mizzet would be painful here, but they are on double swamp, so seems unlikely. Of course the treasures still help. So Niv Mizzet would definitely not be impossible. But then we can fight with Fire it. Mastermind's Acquisition instead, I see. Alright, so time for Swordtooth. Into Treasure Map. And then next turn we can Frenzy. Or we can Jade Light first, we'll see. I wonder what they got with the acquisition. Sunbird's Invocation, alright, now we're talking. Get to empty your hands, play 2 lands, and then probably just play a Frenzy. Or we could play the Jade Light Ranger first. We'll Jade Light first. Even though all the lands we draw here are not too useful. It's still a 2/1 creature. And probably can put that in the graveyard since we're not gonna draw it unless they deal with the Frenzy, but they're in Grixis, so that seems unlikely. Put that in the graveyard for now. And then we can hit for 5 with the Swordtooth. Hopefully. Alright. So we've got the combo assembled. Even have access to a kicked Fight with Fire in hand, so that's also something we have available. So the Sunburst Invocation, definitely scary, but we've got our combo assembled, so we can be pretty scary too. Alright, let's play some stuff off the top. Nice. Let's keep going. Can Banefire for 2. Let's attack first. See what happens. Might want to draw the Banefire so we have access to it in our hand. Alright, Explosion. And what do they find? Let's see. So they didn't have enough mana to kill the Swordtooth. Finds a second Sunburst Invocation, that's scary. So we could Banefire for 2 here, but I could see just drawing the Banefire, and then next turn we could sack the Experimental Frenzy, 4 mana, play 2 lands, and we'll have a Banefire for X equals 5, which might be enough to win the game, not sure. Yeah, let's just pass a turn. We'll probably just activate the treasure map just to put a counter on it. But the game plan now is we don't need our creatures anymore to win the game, so we can just burn them out with Fight with Fire and Banefire. So even if they spend resources killing our creatures, we'll be okay. Just need to worry about them not killing us on the spot here with some burn spells. Pirate Spillage, alright. Thought Erasure, that's too bad. It's gonna take away the Fight with Fire. But that's why leaving the Banefire on top is useful. And they still need to find an answer to the creatures in play, of course. But they're pretty likely to find it. Doom Whisper they can select, so didn't find anything with the second Sunburst Invocation. So now they have 4 mana, hopefully no Ritual of Sit. Alright, it's too bad. Finds another Pirate Spillage, so their points going off. So let's scry with the treasure map end of turn still. Keep that on top for now. And what's on top? Land. Wildgrowth Walker, so let's see, how much mana do we have? 7, 8, 9. So, I mean, we'll definitely play the Wildgrowth here. But then we might want to keep 4 mana so we can flip or sacrifice the Frenzy and then play a lethal Banefire next turn if they don't have any hand disruption. So we'll scry here with our treasure map. Bottom the land. Another land on top. Alright, I mean... 6, 7, 8, 9. We have a lethal Banefire next turn if we get to sack Frenzy end of turn and they don't gain any life. And don't take away Banefire with a Thought Erasure. But they might also be able to kill us here. We'll see. Yeah, we have to flip the treasure map to have enough mana to have a lethal Banefire here, I think. 6, 7, 8, 9. Otherwise it would only be for 9. Pirate Spillage. Alright, let's hope to dodge that hand disruption. And, oof, Moment of Craving lets them gain 2. Or Vraska's Contempt. Instead of Mastermind's Acquisition, not sure what they'll find here. Hopefully no Thought Erasure. They got a card out of the sideboard, so it could also be something to deal with the Experimental Frenzy, although I'm not sure what would be an answer here. They decided not to kill the Wild Growth Walker. Yeah, I mean, I think we're sacking the Frenzy here and hope for the best. Put a stop on upkeep since we want to bottom the land. And hope they can gain enough life. So we'll transform Treasure Map. They did show us Moment of Craving in their deck and Vraska's Contempt, so they could definitely gain at least 2. Alright, let's draw. So let's attack for 1. That works. Alright, so let's Banefire for X equals 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So even if they gain 2, that's not enough. Alright, did we get there? Alright, GG's. Sweet, so some pretty interesting games here. Sweet, so I think that's gonna round out our stream for today. Had some nice drafts going and then some fun games with our Wayward Swordtooth deck at the end there. Wanna thank everyone for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.